The crystalline spires of Nexus Point stretched endlessly into the void, their surfaces reflecting the light of a dozen nearby stars. Within the station's Grand Assembly Hall, representatives from 47 worlds had gathered for the decennial Peace Accords, the most significant diplomatic event in the known galaxy. The air hummed with the soft translation fields that allowed hundreds of species to communicate as one. Marcus Rivera adjusted his dark blue formal jacket and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in his stomach. At 23, he was the youngest member of Earth's diplomatic corps to ever attend such a gathering. His auburn hair was perfectly styled, his green eyes alert as he scanned the magnificent hall. Towering columns of what appeared to be living crystal pulsed with gentle bioluminescence, while delegates from across the galaxy filled the amphitheater-style seating. "Stay close and observe," Ambassador Helena Cross murmured beside him. The veteran diplomat's silver hair was pulled back severely, her pale blue eyes missing nothing. "This is your chance to learn how real galactic politics work." Marcus nodded, though his attention was already captured by the elaborate stage at the center of the hall. Representatives from the major powers would address the assembly, setting the tone for the week-long negotiations ahead. Earth, despite humanity's relatively recent entry into galactic society, had earned a seat at the table through a combination of military prowess and diplomatic necessity. A hush fell over the assembly as the Etherian delegation entered. Marcus felt his breath catch as he glimpsed their leader, Princess Valeria Sorvine, heir to one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empires. Even from a distance, she was breathtaking. Her skin held a subtle luminescence that seemed to shift between pearl and silver, while her hair fell in midnight black waves past her shoulders. She wore robes of deep violet that seemed to capture and hold starlight, and when she moved, it was with a grace that spoke of centuries of royal breeding. Despite being only 19 standard years old, Princess Valeria commanded the attention of every being in the hall. The Etherian Empire controlled nearly a third of the galaxy's habitable worlds, and their mastery of advanced technologies made them virtually unchallenged in terms of raw power. "She's beautiful," Marcus whispered without thinking. "Ambassador." Cross shot him a warning look. "She's also dangerous." The Etherians consider themselves the galaxy's natural rulers. "Don't let her appearance fool you. She's been trained in politics since birth." As Princess Valeria took the stage, the hall fell completely silent. Her voice, when she spoke, was like music, melodious and clear, carrying easily to every corner of the vast space, even without amplification. "Honored delegates," she began, her violet eyes sweeping across the assembly. "I stand before you today as a representative of a civilization that has guided this galaxy for over 10,000 years. The Etherian Empire has brought order to chaos, culture to barbarism, and wisdom to those who would otherwise stumble blindly through the darkness." Her words were diplomatically phrased, but Marcus could hear the underlying arrogance. This wasn't unusual. Most of the major powers viewed themselves as superior to the younger species. What came next, however, took him completely by surprise. "The Etherian Empire welcomes peace," Princess Valeria continued, her tone growing slightly sharper. "But we must speak honestly about the ... challenges that face us in these modern times." Her gaze seemed to find the human delegation with laser-like precision. "Some among us represent species that have only recently crawled from their home planets. Worlds that learned to harness fire mere moments ago in galactic terms, yet now presumed to sit as equals among civilizations that were crossing between stars when their ancestors were still learning to use tools." Marcus felt every eye in the human section turned toward him and Ambassador Cross. The older woman's face had gone pale, but her expression remained diplomatically neutral. Around them, he could sense the tension building. "We must ask ourselves," Princess Valeria said, her voice carrying a note of what might have been amusement, "whether true peace can be achieved when we grant the same voice to species that solve their problems with crude violence as we do to those who have mastered the arts of civilization. Her luminous gaze seemed to lock directly onto Marcus. When we allow beings who measure their worth in primitive conquests to speak with the same authority as those who have spent millennia perfecting the sciences of harmony and enlightenment. The insult was carefully crafted, never mentioning humans by name, but making it clear to everyone present exactly which species she meant. Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily. Around him, he could hear the barely suppressed murmurs of outrage from the human delegation. Some might call such generosity wise, the princess continued, her voice now carrying an unmistakable note of condescension. Others might question whether misplaced charity serves the cause of true and lasting peace. She paused, letting her words sink in. After all, can we build a stable future on the participation of those who bring only chaos and destruction to every world they touch? The hall erupted in whispers and shocked murmurs. Several delegations looked uncomfortable, while others, particularly those who had territorial disputes with humanity, seemed pleased by the Etherian princess's words. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. His first instinct was to respond, to defend humanity's honor, to point out the Etherian Empire's own bloody history, to challenge her right to judge his people. The words burned in his throat, demanding to be spoken. Instead, something unexpected happened. A strange calm descended over him, and he found himself seeing the situation with sudden clarity. This was exactly what she wanted, for him to react emotionally, to prove her point about human savagery. She had crafted her insult to provoke exactly this response. Without a word, Marcus Rivera turned and began walking toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence of the great hall. The soft sound of his formal shoes against the polished crystal floor seemed impossibly loud in the hushed space. He didn't hurry, didn't storm out in anger. He simply walked with quiet dignity toward the massive doors at the rear of the assembly. Behind him, he could hear the confused murmurs beginning to build. Princess Valeria's voice had faltered mid-sentence as she watched him go. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the stares, didn't give her the satisfaction of any reaction at all. The great doors opened before him with a soft whisper of advanced technology, and Marcus Rivera stepped through them into the corridor. Beyond. Only then did he allow himself to breathe deeply, his heart pounding with the effort maintaining his composure. Back in the hall, Princess Valeria stood at the podium in stunned silence. In all her 19 years, through all her training in diplomatic warfare, she had never encountered anything like this. She had expected anger, demands for apology, perhaps even a challenge. Instead, this young human had simply left the silence, stretched on uncomfortably, until one of the other delegates finally called for a recess. As the assembly began to disperse, Princess Valeria remained at the podium, her violet eyes fixed on the doors through which Marcus had disappeared. For the first time in her life, the heir to the Etherian Empire found herself completely uncertain about what had just happened. And for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. That uncertainty was far more disturbing than any angry response could have been. In the corridor outside, Marcus leaned against the crystal wall and closed his eyes. He hadn't planned his reaction, it had simply felt right in the moment. But as he stood there in the aftermath, he had the strangest feeling that his silent walk had accomplished something that no words ever could. He just wasn't sure what. The communications array aboard the human diplomatic vessel Aurora hadn't stopped humming since the previous day's assembly. Marcus Rivera sat in his modest quarters, staring out at the star field beyond Nexus Point's massive viewing ports, trying to ignore the constant chime of incoming messages. His silent walkout had apparently become the most talked-about moment in galactic diplomatic history. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting Ambassador Cross with another briefing about the political. Fallout. Instead, Jackson Reed stepped through the doorway, tall, lean, with the kind of sharp features that made him instantly recognizable across human space. As the most prominent journalist covering galactic affairs, Jackson had built his reputation on getting the stories others couldn't. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his brown eyes held the gleam of someone who'd stumbled onto the story of a lifetime. "Marcus Rivera," Jackson said with a grin. "The man who broke the galaxy with silence. Mind if I sit?" "I'd rather not do any interviews," Marcus replied, though he gestured toward the small seating area anyway. "This isn't exactly an interview." Jackson settled into the chair across from him. "More like a friendly chat between two humans trying to figure out how you've managed to become the most famous person in known space without saying a single word." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'm hardly famous." "Oh, but you are." Jackson pulled out a small holographic display unit and activated it. Images flickered to life in the air, between them news feeds from dozens of worlds, social networks buzzing with activity, diplomatic channels practically smoking with urgent communications. "Look at this. The Thorian Council is calling your walkout the most elegant display of strength in recent memory. The Aquarian Collective has issued a formal statement supporting what they're calling humanity's mature response to provocation. Even the warlike Krogan clans are impressed apparently. Their word for what you did translates roughly to the silence of contained thunder." Marcus watched the feeds with growing amazement. His face appeared in dozens of different contexts, news analysis, opinion pieces, even artistic interpretations of the moment he'd turned away from Princess Valeria's podium. "Of course," Jackson continued with journalistic balance, "not everyone's impressed. The Etherian nobility are calling it the height of disrespect. Some of the more militant species think you showed weakness. But here's the interesting part." He leaned forward conspirationally. "3 separate intelligence sources tell me Princess Valeria has watched the recording of your walkout over 40 times in the last 24 hours. That caught Marcus's attention. "What?" "She's obsessed with it. My source in the Etherian delegation says she's been holed up in her private quarters, reviewing every second of the encounter. Apparently, she keeps asking why you didn't respond." Meanwhile, aboard the Etherian flagship Celestial Grace, Princess Valeria Sorvain was indeed watching the recording again. She sat in her private study, a room that would have made many planetary treasuries weep with envy. The walls were lined with memory crystals containing the collected wisdom of her people, while priceless artifacts from across the empire decorated elegant alcoves. But her attention was focused entirely on the holographic display showing Marcus's calm retreat from the assembly hall. "Your Highness?" Serafina entered quietly, carrying a tray of Etherian tea. The princess's lady-in-waiting was herself noble-born, with the characteristic silver-touched skin and graceful movements of their people. Her long white blonde hair was braided with small gemstones that caught the light as she moved. "You've barely eaten today." "Watch this," Valeria said, ignoring the tea. "Look at his face when I say humans are violent." "What do you see?" Serafina had served as Valeria's companion since childhood and knew better than to dismiss her mistress's fixations. She studied the display carefully. "He doesn't look angry, even when you're clearly talking about his species." "Exactly." Valeria paused the recording at the moment Marcus began to turn away. "I crafted those words specifically to provoke a reaction. Any normal being, human or otherwise, should have responded with anger, defensiveness, something. Instead, he looks almost sad. No, not sad. Disappointed. Perhaps he simply lacks courage," Serafina suggested diplomatically. "No." Valeria's voice was firm. "I've read his file. Marcus Rivera graduated top of his class from Earth's Diplomatic Academy. Before that, He served briefly in their military during the Proxima border conflict. He has decorations for bravery. This isn't cowardice, it's something else entirely. Serafina set the tea down carefully. Your Highness, Chancellor Mordith has requested an audience. He seems concerned about the political implications. Valeria sighed and finally turned away from the display. Chancellor Mordith had been her father's advisor for decades and had helped guide her own education in statecraft. If he was concerned, the situation was likely more complex than she'd initially realized. Send him in. Chancellor Mordith entered with the measured dignity that marked all high-ranking Etherians. His silver hair was pulled back in the traditional style of court officials, and his deep blue robes marked him as one of the Emperor's inner circle. Despite his advanced age, his violet eyes remained sharp and calculating. Your Highness, he began formally, we need to discuss yesterday's events. You mean my speech? I mean the humans' response to it. Mordith activated his own holographic display, showing political analysis from across the galaxy. What you, intended as a demonstration of Etherian superiority, has backfired spectacularly. Look at these diplomatic responses. The display showed a flood of support for humanity's restrained dignity and criticism of Etherian provocation. Several species that had been neutral in the ongoing political realignments were now leaning toward the human alliance bloc. Lord Cassius and his war faction are particularly pleased, Mordith continued, his tone suggesting this was not good news. They see this as proof that peaceful coexistence is impossible and are pushing for more aggressive measures. Valeria felt a chill at the mention of Lord Cassius. The tall, imposing Etherian noble led a faction within their government that believed the Empire's dominance could only be maintained through force. While not officially treasonous, his views often put him at odds with their father's more diplomatic approach. What does my father think? She asked. Emperor Aurelius is displeased. He feels you exceeded your authority in making such provocative statements without consultation. Mordith's expression softened slightly. However, he also recognizes that the situation may present opportunities if handled correctly. What kind of opportunities? The human delegation has requested a private meeting to discuss the incident. If we can turn this into a broader negotiation, we might gain significant concessions on the trade disputes. Valeria nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The human who walked out Marcus Rivera. What do we know about him personally? Mordith looked surprised by the question. Why do you ask? Professional curiosity. The Chancellor pulled up a detailed file. 23 years old, born on Earth's colony world New Geneva. Parents were mid-level government officials. Graduated with highest honors from the Terran Diplomatic Institute. Served briefly in their space navy before transferring to civilian diplomatic service. No romantic attachments on record. No significant political connections beyond his professional role. By all accounts, he's exactly what he appears. Junior diplomat with a promising career. And yet, he's now the most famous human in the galaxy. Sometimes the most significant moments arise from the most unexpected sources, Your Highness. That evening, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on the briefing materials Ambassador Cross had given him. The weight of galactic attention was beginning to settle on his shoulders in ways he hadn't anticipated. A soft chime from his personal communicator interrupted his studies. The message was brief and unsigned. Your silence spoke louder than any words could. Some of us are listening. A friend. Before he could puzzle over the cryptic note, another message arrived. This one from an official Etherian diplomatic channel. Princess Valeria. Sorvain requests the honor of a private conversation with Mr. Marcus Rivera at his convenience. The matter concerns mutual understanding between our peoples. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. A private meeting with the princess who had publicly insulted his entire species? It could be a trap, a diplomatic maneuver, or something else entirely. But as he sat there in his quiet quarters, surrounded by the vast darkness of space, he found himself curious about the young woman who ruled an empire, and yet seemed genuinely puzzled by his simple act of walking away. His response was characteristically brief. "I would be honored to meet with Her Highness. When and where would be convenient?" The reply came within minutes. "Tonight. Private Dock 7. Come alone." As Marcus prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his life, he had no way of knowing that in the darker corners of Nexus Point, other forces were already moving. Lord Cassius had arrived aboard the station with a small but influential delegation of war faction supporters, and their agenda went far beyond diplomatic protests. The ripples from Marcus Rivera's silent walkout were spreading across the galaxy, but not all of them would lead to understanding. Some would lead to something far more dangerous. Private Dock 7 was located in one of Nexus Point's less monitored sections, typically reserved for discreet diplomatic meetings. Marcus Rivera arrived precisely on time, his diplomatic training overriding the nervous energy that had been building since accepting Princess Valeria's invitation. The docking bay was dimly lit, with only the soft blue glow of safety lights illuminating the sleek Etherean shuttle that waited in the center of the bay. Nina Torres, Earth's security liaison, had not been pleased when Marcus informed her of the meeting. The compact woman with steel-gray eyes and prematurely silver hair had built her reputation on keeping diplomats alive in hostile situations. Her protests had been overruled by Ambassador Cross, who saw the meeting as too important an opportunity to miss, but Nina had insisted on positioning herself within communication range. "Remember," she had told Marcus before he left, "if anything feels wrong, trigger your emergency beacon. I'll have a response team here in under 3 minutes." Now, as Marcus approached the shuttle, he wondered if he should have listened to Nina's concerns more carefully. The bay seemed unnaturally quiet, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched from the shadows. The shuttle's entry ramp lowered with barely a whisper of sound, revealing Princess Valeria Sorvain waiting. At the top, she had traded her formal court robes for something simpler, a flowing dress of midnight blue that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, and without the formal trappings of royal ceremony, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Mr. Rivera," she said as he climbed the ramp, "thank you for coming." "Your Highness," Marcus replied with a diplomatic bow, "though I admit I'm curious about the unusual circumstances." "Privacy is sometimes more valuable than protocol," Valeria said, gesturing for him to enter the shuttle's main cabin. The interior was a masterpiece of Etherean design, elegant curves and surfaces that seemed to flow like water, with soft lighting that adapted to the occupant's presence. "Please sit. Can I offer you refreshment?" "That's very kind, but unnecessary." Marcus settled into a chair that somehow molded itself to his form perfectly. "Your Highness requested this meeting to discuss mutual understanding. I confess I'm not sure where to begin." Valeria remained standing, moving to look out the shuttle's viewing port at the stars beyond. "You could start by explaining why you walked away. You were insulting my people. I saw no benefit in providing the reaction you were clearly seeking." "And what reaction was that?" She turned to face him, her violet eyes intense with curiosity. Marcus considered his words carefully. "Anger, defensiveness, some kind of emotional outburst that would validate your characterization of humans as primitive and violent. You think my speech was calculated provocation?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that you're far too intelligent to accidentally deliver the most diplomatically inflammatory address in recent history. The question is why." For the first time since they'd met, Princess Valeria smiled, not the practiced expression of royal diplomacy, but something genuine and surprised. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who would try to impress me with how civilized humans could be. Someone who would apologize for his species' shortcomings and beg for my approval. She moved to sit across from him, her expression thoughtful. Instead, you simply left. You made me irrelevant. I don't understand. Power, Mr. Rivera, is often about controlling reactions. When you insult someone publicly, you force them to respond within the framework you've created. They can be angry, defensive, pleading, but all of those reactions acknowledge your authority to judge them. Her voice grew quiet. You were the first person to simply opt out of the game entirely. Marcus studied her face, trying to understand the complex emotions he saw there. Your Highness, may I ask you a personal question? Valeria, she said. And yes, why does it matter to you? You have an empire to rule, a galaxy that defers to your people's wisdom and power. Why does the reaction of one junior diplomat trouble you so much? Valeria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Have you ever been surrounded by people who tell you exactly what they think you want to hear? Who react to your every word? With the precise emotion you expect? No, Marcus admitted. That sounds lonely. It is. Her voice was barely above a whisper. When you walked away, you showed me something I've never seen before. Someone who genuinely didn't care about my opinion of him or his people. Not because of arrogance or hostility, but because ... Why? Help me understand. Marcus leaned forward, speaking earnestly. Because the opinion of someone who would judge an entire species based on prejudice isn't worth having. Your Highness Valeria spoke about humans without knowing us. You reduced billions of individuals to a caricature. Why would I want the approval of someone who had already decided what I was before we'd ever met? The silence that followed was broken by a soft chime from Marcus's communicator. Nina's voice crackled through with urgent intensity. Marcus, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are picking up movement in the outer docks. Someone's been watching. Your location. Before Marcus could respond, the shuttle's emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in red. Princess Valeria was on her feet instantly, her diplomatic demeanor replaced by something harder and more alert. What's happening? Marcus asked. Trouble. Valeria moved to a control panel with practiced efficiency. Someone's jamming our communications and navigation systems. Her fingers flew over the controls, bringing up external sensor readings. 3 ships, unregistered, closing fast on our position. Pirates? Worse. Valeria's expression had gone grim. Those are Etherian military designs, but they're not broadcasting proper identification codes. The first impact shook the shuttle violently, throwing both of them against the bulkheads. Through the viewing port, Marcus could see flashes of weapons, fire lighting up the darkness of space around them. Nexus Point's defense systems were responding, but the attackers seemed focused specifically on their location. This isn't random, Valeria said, her voice tight with controlled fear. Someone knew about our meeting. Can we get out of here? Not with the navigation systems down. She was working frantically at the controls. But this shuttle has defensive capabilities. Her hands moved to a different panel, and Marcus felt the subtle shift as energy shields activated around them got another impact, stronger this time. The lights flickered, and Marcus could smell the acrid scent of overloaded circuits. Your Highness, he said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. Do you have weapons on board? Personal defense only. This was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. She looked at him with something approaching respect. You're not panicking. Would that help? Before she could answer, the shuttle's main hatch exploded inward. Armed figures in environmental suits stormed through the breach, weapons raised. Marcus instinctively moved to place himself between the attackers and Valeria, though he had no weapon and no real way to protect her. The lead attacker raised his weapon toward Marcus. but hesitated when Valeria stepped forward, her entire bearing transformed into something regal and commanding. "Stop," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "I am Princess Valeria Sorvain, heir to the Etherian Empire. Any attack on my person is an act of war against my people." The attackers exchanged glances, and Marcus realized they hadn't expected to find the princess here. Their hesitation gave him the opening he needed. Moving faster than he'd ever moved in his life, Marcus lunged toward the nearest attacker, using his training from his brief military service. He managed to wrestle the weapon away, but more attackers were already pouring through the breach. That's when the second explosion rocked the shuttle, but this one came from outside. Through the damaged hull, Marcus could see the sleek forms of Nexus Point security vessels engaging the mysterious attackers. Nina's voice crackled through the damaged communication system. "Hold on in there. We're coming." The firefight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the smoke finally cleared, 3 of the attackers were dead, 2 were unconscious, and Marcus found himself sitting on the deck with a nasty gash on his forehead, staring at Princess Valeria, who was holding one of the captured weapons with disturbing competence. "Are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "I think so." He looked at the unconscious attackers. "Who were they?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Her violet eyes were hard as diamonds. "Someone wanted both of us dead, Marcus. This wasn't about politics or diplomacy. This was assassination." Nina Torres burst through the damaged hatch, weapon drawn, followed by a squad of security personnel. She took in the scene quickly, her professional gaze noting the casualties and damage. "Status report," she barked. 3 dead, 2 captured, Valeria reported crisply. "Mr. Rivera is injured but ambulatory." The attackers used modified Etherian military equipment. Nina's eyes narrowed. "Inside job?" "Almost certainly." Valeria stood, helping Marcus to his feet. "Someone with access to our military technology and knowledge of this meeting's location and timing." As the medical teams arrived to treat Marcus's injuries and secure the prisoners, he found himself looking at Princess Valeria with new understanding. The young woman who had delivered that provocative speech was revealed to be far more complex than he'd initially realized, capable of deadly competence when threatened, but also willing to risk herself to protect him. "Valeria," he said quietly, as the medics worked on his head wound, "why did you step in front of me when they broke in?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the security teams process the scene. "Because," she said finally, "you were the first person in my life to treat me like a person instead of a symbol. I wasn't going to let anyone kill you for it." As they were escorted back to the main station for debriefing, Marcus realized that whatever had started between them in that assembly hall had just become something far more significant. Someone had been willing to commit murder to prevent them from talking to each other, which meant their conversation was more dangerous and more important than either of them had realized. The game had just become deadly serious, and Marcus Rivera was no longer just a junior diplomat who had walked away from an insult. He was now a target, and the beautiful, complex princess beside him was the only person who might know why. As the medical bay doors closed behind them, neither Marcus nor Valeria noticed the figure watching from the observation deck above Lord Cassius, his expression unreadable as he observed the failure of what should have been a simple elimination. The war faction's first move had failed. But Cassius was a patient man, and there were always more pieces to play in the game of galactic politics. The real question was whether Marcus and Valeria would live long enough to realize they had become pawns in a much larger and more dangerous scheme.